Om. Om. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Vakratunda Mahakaya Suryakoti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kurume Deva Sarvakaryeshu Sarvada. Saraswati Namastubhyam Varade Kamarupini Vidyarambham Karishyami Siddhir Bhavatu Me Sada. Samasta Janakalyane Niratam Karunamayam Namami Chinmayam Devam Satgurum Brahma Vidmaram Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langhayate Girim Yatkripatamaham Bande Paramananda Madhavam. Paramananda Madhavam. All right. So we will read now, starting from verse number 1 of second chapter. So now that we are on second chapter, what we will do is we will read 10-15 verses before the class, before we start the next verse, so that we have a whole background. Okay, so please turn your pages to the first verse of the second chapter, and we will read up to verse number 11. Okay, we'll read together. Om Shri Paramatmane Namaha. Atha Dvitiyodhyayaha Sankhya Yogaha Tam Tatha Kripaya Vishtam Ashrupurna Kulekshanam Vishidantamidam Vakyam Uvacha Madhusudanaha. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Kutastva Kashmalamidam Vishame Samupasthitam Anarya Jushtamaswargyam Akirtikaram Arjuna. Klaibhyam Masmagamapartha Naitat Vayupapadyate Kshudram Hridaya Daurbalyam Tyaktvottishta Parantapa. Arjuna Uvacha Katham Bhishmamaham Sankhye Dronam cha Madhusudana Ishubhih Pratiyotsyami Pujarha Varisudana. Guruna Hatva hi Mahanubhavan Shreyo Bhoktum Bhaikshamapi Haloke Hatvartha Kamanstu Guru Nihaiva Punjiya Bhogan Rudhira Pradigdan Nachaitad Vidmah Kataranno Gariyaha Yadva Jayema Yadivanno Jayeyuhu Yaneva Hatvana Jijivishamaha Devastita Pramukhe Dhartarashtraha Karpanya Doshopahatasvabhavaha Prichhami Tvam Dharma Sambudha Chetaha Yathreyasya nishchitam bruhi tanme Shishyasteham shadhimam tvam prapannam Nahi prapashyami mamapanudyat Yachokamuchoshanamindriyanam Avapya bhumavasapatnam riddham Rajyam suranam api chadhipatyam Sanjaya uvacha Eva muktva rishikesham Gudakesha parantapaha Nayotsya iti govindam Uktva tushnim babhuvaha Tamuvacha rishikeshaha Prahasanniva bharata Senayorubhayor madhye Vishidantamidam vachaha Shri Bhagavan vacha Ashochanan vashochastvam Prajnavaadanscha bhashase Gatasunagatasunshcha Nanushochanti panditaha. All right. So we are at a very, very critical point of the Bhagavad Gita. And this critical point is now Arjuna has let everything out. He has let everything out, all his emotions, everything. And finally, he surrendered to Lord Krishna. And then Lord Krishna finally smiles because Arjuna starts to keep quiet. He's quiet. So now Lord Krishna smiles because he says, now I can deliver this message of the Bhagavad Gita to the entire world using Arjuna as the nimitta. So Arjuna is the nimitta. He is the cause. This is a great excuse for me to share this precious knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita, which Lord Krishna has been holding. He's been waiting to give to us. And the first message that Bhagavan Krishna gives to Arjuna in verse number 11, he says, the wise do not grieve. Now, before we get into this verse, first we need to analyze what is Arjuna's real issue, right? So he went through so much in chapter 1. What is Arjuna's real issue here? What is his problem? First of all, we see that Arjuna is grieving. He is in deep sorrow. And we see this in his body language. You know, his limbs are failing him. His head is dizzy. His lips are parched. He drops his Gandiva. We see he's in sorrow because of his words. He expresses. He says, even if I get this kingdom, even if I get wealth, I just don't understand. I don't even see how this is going to remove my sorrow. He expresses himself. And mentally, we can see that he doesn't know what to do. So he is in complete sorrow, or what we call shoka. Shoka means sorrow. Shoka means grief. Now, what is the cause of his grief? Why is he feeling sorrowful? He's feeling sorrowful because of death. He says, how am I going to let Bhishma and Drona die? How am I going to be that person who kills them? They are my gurus. They are people who are so dear to me. How can I kill them? So his sorrow comes from death, from seeing that his people, his loved ones will die. But then we have to think about this deeply. Is death the real cause of sorrow? If death was the real cause of sorrow, then Arjuna had killed so many people before in battle. Before, when he was fighting in Virata Parva. In Virata Parva, he was slaying all of the Kauravas, if you remember. He was in disguise as Brihanlala, and he was defeating all of the Kauravas. Before, in previous battles, Arjuna had also killed and vanquished enemies. So, but that didn't make him feel sad. So is really death the cause of sorrow? He's faced warriors before, he's faced soldiers before, and he's finished them. So clearly we see that death is really not the cause of sorrow. The cause of sorrow is what we call moha, or delusion. He is thinking, I am theirs and they are mine. They are my people, they belong to me and I belong to them. And therefore, I feel so sad defeating them. So the cause of sorrow we clearly establish is not death, but it's delusion. This we also see here and now. You know, when this whole pandemic started, there were many deaths in many, many countries, many deaths. So many people suffered, so many people were going through things, and it hit us, but we weren't grieving. It did hit us, but we weren't grieving. But now, when the deaths are coming closer to people whom we know, people who we're connected to, people who we say, my friend, my family friend, my relative, then it hits us more. So we clearly see in our lives and in Arjuna's life, what's hitting us is not death. What's hitting us is delusion. So he feels sorrow, which we call shoka. This shoka is caused by moha, or delusion. How does this delusion come about? How does this delusion that they are my people and I am theirs, how does it come about? It comes about because we identify with the limited in us. In our last class, I had said that we have 3 instruments, and this is in Puja Gurudev's BMI chart. We have these 3 instruments: the body, the mind, and the intellect. These are instruments, they're equipments, they're tools, they're faculties by which we experience the world at large. The body is something that is inert. It cannot know me. It cannot know who I am. It is completely inert. And it is something that I perceive. I am able to see it. So if I'm able to see something, then it must be different from me. If I'm able to see this book must be different from me. And this body is constantly changing. It's constantly changing in many, many ways. Not only in years it changes, but in months, in days, in minutes, the body changes, right? Those who have gotten the second vaccination, right? How the body changed right after that vaccination. Before you get the vaccination, they'll say, these 10 things might happen to you. You might get nausea, might get sick, you might get chills, you might get diarrhea. These 10 things may happen to you. And after we get the vaccination, true enough, the body changes. So because this body is something that's changing, because it's something that is impermanent, it also goes. Because it's something that's seen, because it's something that's inert, it's clearly not me. It's clearly not me. I am different from it. But when I take myself to be this body, when I say I, the self, that pure awareness, am this body, then I suffer. Why? Because all of the body's limitations come to me. I am this body which is limited. It has limited strength. This body has to go through so many changes. It has to go through old age. Then we suffer all the pains and the pangs of old age. This body has to go through so much, temperature changes. This body has to go through pain, So the minute that I start to identify with my body, I take on all of the suffering of that body. I take on also all the good feelings of the body, don't get me wrong, but those good feelings also end up in suffering. Because when those good moments, when the body feels great, the body feels fit and amazing, we feel good, but that also comes to an end. So therefore, that's also sorrow. So when I take this body to be me, I suffer a lot. And whatever this body connects to or relates to, I take as mine. So this body came from my mom, my dad. This is my brother. This is my sister. This is my friend, my cousin. This is my house. This is my book. So I take myself to be the body, and already I inherit all the dharmas of this body in all of the relationships of this body, based on the notion that I am this body. The same goes for the mind. The mind's dharma is that it changes. We have so many different thoughts every day, every moment. And we are aware of those thoughts. We know our thoughts. Therefore, we cannot be our thoughts. And so, because our thoughts are separate from us, we are that pure awareness. But when we take ourselves to be that, we go through all of the motions of joy, of sorrow, of anger, of patience, of greed. We go through ups and downs, ups and downs, ups and downs. And even the ups, I said, are downs, because you want the ups to stay. We want our minds to be in a good place, but it won't last for a long time. It will go down, and that's when we feel sorrowful. And therefore, anything that the mind takes to be its own, we inherit. My worries, my stress, my problems, we inherit that. And therefore, we suffer. So this suffering of Arjuna is based on delusion that they are mine and I am theirs. And this delusion is based on I am the body, I am the mind, I am the intellect, I am the ego. This delusion is based on that notion. The minute we take ourselves to be this limited entity, as I explained, we will suffer. It's just about time. We will suffer. And so this delusion, what causes this delusion? What causes this delusion is ignorance. We don't know who we really are. And when we don't know who we really are, that's a big issue. Because our nature is Sat, it's existence. Our nature is awareness. Our nature is bliss. This is our nature. But we get deluded into thinking we're something else. Then we own up all of the dharmas and possessions of those equipments, and then we suffer. So Lord Krishna, what he did then, he understood the root cause of Arjuna's problem. The root cause of Arjuna's problem is ignorance, and he understood that so clearly. And so he said, I am going to remove Arjuna's sorrow by giving him knowledge. So this is a really important connection. If we don't make this connection, then we won't understand where Lord Krishna is coming from. So Arjuna is feeling sorrowful. That sorrow is caused by ignorance. And therefore, the antidote to remove sorrow is knowledge. And this is what he gives in this shloka. How does he say it? He says, look, Arjuna, ashochan anvachochastvam. He says, tvam, you, anvachochaha. means you have grieved for Ashochan, those who should not be grieved over. You are grieving for those who should not be grieved over. And pragnya vadanscha bhashase, and you speak like you're somebody so wise. Gatasun agatanscha means there are people who gatasun have gone, and agatasun are going. They have not yet gone. Na anushochanti panditaha, and the wise never grieve for them. The wise never grieve for those who have gone or those who are going. This is what Sri Krishna says. What does he mean? So first he's trying to tell Arjuna, look at Bhishma and Drona. You're so scared to defeat them. You're so scared to go into battle with them. But are Bhishma and Drona the body? Are they this body? Is Bhishma and Drona this? No. So if you're grieving for this body, Bhishma and Drona are not this body. This body is something completely inert. Are Bhishma and Drona the jiva, or sometimes what we translate as soul? Are they the jiva? No. That jiva is a false identity. When we identify with the body, we become the perceiver. When we identify with the mind, we become the feeler. When we identify with the intellect, we become the thinker. And this PFT, perceiver, feeler, thinker, is the ego, is the jiva. It's born out of identification. They're not that. What are they then? They are the self. They are that pure awareness. So Arjuna, you are grieving over the self that's always there, the self that's pure awareness, the self that's pure consciousness. There's no point grieving over it. So how can you grieve over it? And he says, pragnya vadanscha bhashase. You have given so many arguments in the first chapter, little bit in the second chapter. You are saying all of these things, but you're doing something different. You're speaking as though you are wise, but you're acting foolish. So he says, Arjuna, please rethink this whole situation. Everybody will go. At some point in time, everybody will go. And Gurudev says beautifully, people are gone or they are going. Nobody's staying. Nobody comes out of life alive. Everybody is gone or everybody is going. And so he says, the wise, panditaha here, panditaha means the one who has self-knowledge. The one who has self-knowledge doesn't grieve. Because the one who has self-knowledge knows that the essence of all of us is that pure awareness. And this is the first upadesha, or the teaching that Lord Krishna says. So, you know, there's this saying that, why do good people suffer? But the truth is, good people don't suffer. If this knowledge is very firm on who we are, then that suffering will not be there. There are three aspects to our being, generally. One is what we call the body, one is what we call the soul or the jiva, and one is what we call the self or atma. The body will have to go. It will have to go because that's the dharma of the body. The dharma of the body, it's called sharira. Sharira means shiryamanatvat sharira. That which decays is the body. And therefore the body has to go. At some point in time, it will go. Nobody comes out of life alive. So we are grieving over this body which has to go. at its own time. That doesn't make sense because everyone's time will come. Everyone's time will come, and we can't help that. The second is the jiva, or the soul. The jiva, or the soul, means that subtle body, that reflection of consciousness in the subtle body, in the mind, intellect, equipment. That jiva takes on another body. So there's no point in grieving for that jiva, because that jiva will go on to another body, will go on to another embodiment. And if we look at the self, we can't grieve over, there's no point grieving over the self, which is pure awareness. So he says, na anushochanti pandita. Now, when we look at this verse, right, this is something, this Vedanta that we're seeing in chapter 2, particularly verses 11 to 30, our section, it's a section on grief management. This is for you and me. If somebody is grieving, this is not what we say to them. This is not what we say to them, because this is not very easy to understand. And Lord Krishna will also say that. This knowledge that we are the self, it's not easy to understand. And even further, it's not easy to live. So if you and I are finding that in our lives, someone is going through sorrow, someone is going through suffering, and there are many deaths happening, what can we do? The first thing we can do is accept. Accept that, yes, this is something that's happening right now, and this is not something we can change. We cannot bring a life back. There are many people who go through this experience who cannot accept it in the beginning. They have such a hard time coping with it. So the first thing is to just accept and see what we can do for that being or for that family, for those who are going through that suffering. What is the best thing we can do? The best thing we can do is just be there. People don't like, calling them again, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? Just be there. Just make ourselves available. Just make ourselves present. And that will be a lot. Because the people who are going through suffering, they will have to express. They will have to get everything out. And they just need people to listen. They don't need any of us to judge. They don't need any of us to say, why didn't you do this? Or how did this happen? Or tell me the whole thing. They don't need any of that. They just need a comforting ear, a hand to hold, somebody to just be present so they can release, because it's a lot of pain that they're going through. So the first thing is accept and be present for whoever's going through these moments. The second thing that we can do, if it's our own, if it's somebody who has passed on in our own family or in our own circle, then make their lives worth it. Obviously, those people have gone through so many sacrifices, done so many things for us to live. What can we do to dedicate our lives to them? When I think about Puja Gurudev, this is what I think about. Somebody who passed, who's like family. But what can you do for him? What can you do for that glorious vision? Then spend your whole life, spend whatever you have, dedicating it to him so that his sacrifices are worth it. His hard work is worth it. Whatever he did is worth it. And the third one is to take our own time to heal. As I said, this is from the highest standpoint of Vedanta. Those who can take this and swallow it, great. Those who cannot, take your own time to heal. It's completely okay. It's completely okay. Nobody said that we have to rise up right away. So take your own time. That's why our culture has 13 days of practices, of prayer, of people coming over, of just being around people, so that those people who are suffering can heal. So, as I said, when we are going through this section, keep in mind that this is talking from the highest standpoint. And keep in mind that this is something for you and me, but it may not be for everybody. And we have to do what's right for whomever we are there for. Okay? So coming back to Bhagavan Sri Krishna, he says, the wise, they don't grieve. And in this verse, you find what the Bhagavad Gita is actually about. In this verse, we find the Anubandha Chatushtaya. Anubandha Chatushtaya. Chatushtaya means fourfold factors. Anubandha, that tie us to a text. And those four factors are as follows. The first one is called Adhikari. Adhikari means student. Who is the student of the text? Who is the one going to study this? The next one is what we call Vishaya. Vishaya means what is the subject matter of the text? What is the text going to be about? The third one is called Prayojana, or what is the goal of this text? Why would anyone want to read this text or scripture? And the fourth one is called Sambandha. What is the relationship of the text and the goal? So we will see each one. In this particular verse, the student is Arjuna, who is Ashochan. Who is, not Ashochan, Anvashocha. Anvashochaha. That's the student, the one who's grieving. So the student, Bhagavad Gita, is the one who's going through suffering, who's going through samsara, who's going through stress and tension and not knowing how to deal with so many things put on their plate. This is who the student of Bhagavad Gita is. It's not a calm, quiet, Upanishadic student. It's a student in the midst of a battle with so many questions, with so many ups and downs of life. This is who the Bhagavad Gita is addressing. So, Anvashocha, the one who is suffering. What's the subject matter? So the subject matter you can see in the word Panditaha, which means the one who has knowledge. So the subject matter is Atma Jnana, or knowledge of the self. This text is about knowledge of the self. This is the subject matter. The goal of this text, what is this text going to give me? Why would I even want to study this? Na anushochanti panditaha. This text will remove my sorrow. If understood, if reflected upon, if lived, it will remove my sorrow for good. And finally, the relationship is, this is the text that will give me the result. This Bhagavad Gita will give me the result of removal of sorrow. So in this verse number 11, it tells us everything. So if we are that student, that seeker who's going through so much, who wants all of our sorrows removed for good through the knowledge of the self, then we should study the Bhagavad Gita. Otherwise, we should do something else. So Bhagavan Krishna is very, very honest, very open, and he said this is what's to follow. Now we go on to the next verse. He says, there's no point in grieving over the self because, verse number 12, Natvevaham jatu nasam.
Natvevaham त्वेवाहं जातु नासम्
न त्वं नेमे जनाधिपाः
न त्वं नेमे जनाधिपाः
न चैव न भविष्यामः
न चैव न भविष्यामः
सर्वे वयमतः परम्
सर्वे वयमतः परम्
न त्वेवाहं जातु नासम् न त्वं नेमे जनाधिपाः न चैव न भविष्यामः सर्वे वयमतः परम्. So, in a nutshell, what this verse says is there's no reason to grieve. The wise do not grieve because the self is eternal, or Atma is Nitya. It is eternal. He says, tu, but na eva aham jatu na asam. Means there was never a point when I wasn't there. Natvam neme janadipaha. There was never a point, natvam, when you weren't there, or na ime janadipaha, or these kings of the land, there was never a point when they were not there. Na chaiva na bhavishyamaha. And there's never a point where we will not be. Sarve vayamataf param. We will always exist. So what is he saying? It is not that at any time in the past, indeed, was I not, nor were you, nor these rulers of men, nor verily shall we ever cease to be hereafter. Being Atma, being that pure self, our existence doesn't depend on the body. Bhagavan Krishna is saying that you and I are always there. And it's not that there's two Atmas or there's two selves. There's only one self. But if we're speaking from the standpoint of what we call jiva or individuality, there's many, many, many jivas. But if we're speaking from Atma, there's only one self. And there was never a time when Atma didn't exist. And there was never a time when, or there will never be a time that Atma will not exist. So even if this body goes, Atma is still there. Even if this jiva takes up another body, Atma is still there. Nothing happens to it. It's absolutely eternal. So therefore, there is no reason to grieve. So I'm going to share with you the BMI chart and I'll explain to you what happens at death. So we become clear that Atma is permanent. Okay? So here I hope all of you had a chance to listen to Puja Gurudev's BMI recording. What it's saying here is this body is going to decay, right? Because that's its nature. That's what it does. And, you know, it's like saying, it's like asking a dog, why are you barking? Well, that's what's the nature of the dog. The nature of the dog is to bark. That's what it does. And so the nature of the body is it decays. You know, it's not that our body gets younger or more beautiful or more, you know, flexible or whatever when we grow older. It just decays, right? So at some point in time, this body will go. It will leave, right? And what happens is the mind and the intellect equipment, this jiva, right? This whole package, this jiva, will go back to its vasanas, will merge with its vasanas. And then when it's ready to take up another body, again, it expresses its intellect, mind equipment, and it goes into another body. So death means this body is shed, this mind and intellect equipment go to the vasanas, And then again, it's reborn, this mind and intellect equipment express, and it takes up another body. So as you can see, it's like a cycle that's happening. It goes back to the Vasana, and then again, it expresses to another body. This is what's happening in death. Now, you can see that in this Om, it's untouched. Nothing's happening. This Om is not moving. This Om is not going anywhere. In this Om's presence, this whole thing is taking place. And so that is your nature. That awareness, that consciousness, that is your nature. So nothing's happening to you. You are always there. So many bodies we've taken up. So many. We have lived so many, many different births. And we may hopefully not go through other births. But this stays the same. There was never a time that this was not, and there will never be a time where this will cease to be. And so therefore, O Arjuna, the wise do not grieve because they know that our nature is this. And this is what it is. Okay? So therefore, na anushochanti panditaha, because Atma is eternal. Atma is nitya. What else is he trying to say? Okay. Now we go to verse number 13. Okay. Dehinosmin yatha dehe.
Dehinosmin yatha dehe.
Kaumaram yauvanam jara.
Kaumaram yauvanam jara.
Tatha dehantara praptihi.
Tada dehantara praptihi.
Dhirastatra na muhyati.
Dhirastatra na muhyate.
Dehinosmin yatha dehe. Kaumaram yauvanam jara. Tatha dehantara praptihi. Dhirastatra na muhyati. So he says here, Dehina yatha dehina. Just as dehina, that in which a body appears, in this dehe, asmin dehe, in this body, what happens? Kaumaram, childhood, yauvanam, youth, jara, old age, tatha, so too, dehantara praptihi, so it too attains another body, dhirastatra na muhyati, and the one who is dhira. Dhira also here means the one who has the knowledge of the self, na muhyati, does not grieve. Okay, so now we're going to look at this again from 3 standpoints. From the standpoint of the body, it will go through changes. Like we said, because that's its nature. The nature of this world is change. And the only thing constant is change. So the body will go through changes. It will go through childhood. It will go through youth. It will become a youth. It will go through old age. So there are what we call shad vikaras, or 6 modifications that the body goes through. The first one is asti. It is. Next, jayate. Jayate means it's born. Vardhate. Vardhate means it grows. And then viparinamate means it matures. Apakshiyate, it decays. And vinashyati, it is destroyed. This is the cycle of the body. Nobody can escape it. It's the dharma of the body. Just like the dharma of the mind is to think, to have so many thoughts, we cannot escape it unless we go to sleep, right? The dharma of the body is it will go through these 6 vikaras. That's what the body does. Now, from the standpoint of the soul, or what we call jiva, at the appointed time. When is the appointed time? When that jiva can no longer express its desires, and we will see one verse related to this, so I will expound when we come to that verse. When the jiva can no longer express its desires in this current body, then it has to go into another body. Because it cannot express. It has so many desires that it wants to do, it cannot express. And therefore, the jiva will shed that body. At that point in time, it will shed. Now, it might appear that, some natural occurrence caused the death. How do you know the jiva was ready? Everybody goes at their appointed time. That is a fact. Everybody goes at their appointed time. You will see in certain places, there could be a big disaster, but some people live, some people go. Why? Because everybody has their own appointed time. We cannot interfere with that. So the jiva then will take up another body. Dehantara praptihi. The jiva or the soul will take up another body. That's what the jiva does. It transmigrates, right? Karta bhokta jiva. That's what it does. What happens to Atma? Atma or the self is there. Nothing happens to Atma. Atma is that in whose presence everything happened. Imagine how many changes there were ever since we were born. When we were born, we were what, 7, 8 pounds, like very, very small. And then we grew to be very little. And we must have all our baby pictures or whatever. And we had a certain kind of look when we were children. Then we grew to be teenagers. Then we grew to be older, more mature. And then some of us were going to grow to be older, go through old age. So this body is moving, it's changing, it's going through so many things. Now, please tell me, which body are you? Are you the baby body? Or are you the little child body, little boy, little girl? Are you the teenage body, or are you this body? The fact is, we are not that body. We are not that body going through all of these changes. We are that self or Atma, that awareness in which all of these changes are happening. That which is changeless awareness amidst this changing inertness. That changeless awareness is Atma, that presence, that witness, that in whose presence every single thing changes. That is you. So you have nothing to do with that. So then therefore, why grieve? This body will go through whatever it has to go through. That jiva will go into another body, will go into another life. What does it have to do with you? You are the self. And for one who knows the self, then they know that they are not this jiva. They know that they are not this body. And in fact, it's the destruction of that very jivahood. It's the destruction of that individuality. So therefore, he says, this going through childhood, youth, old age, all of this, it will happen, but it's got nothing to do with you. And therefore, the wise don't grieve. Because Atma here is what we call avikriya. Atma is changeless. So therefore, don't grieve. Okay? Now, we come into the next verse, we will just touch upon it a little bit, and then we will go into this more in the next class, okay? Verse number 14. Matra sparshastu kaunteya.
Matra sparshastu kaunteya.
Shitoshna sukha dukkadaha.
Shitoshna sukha dukkadaha.
Agamapayino anityaha.
Agamapayino anityaha.
Tan stitikshasva bharata.
Tam stitikshasva bharata.
Matra sparshastu kaunteya. Shitoshna sukha dukkadaha. Agamapayino anityaha. Tan stitikshasva bharata. So very beautifully, Gurudev writes the introduction for this verse. You'll see in your book. I'll read it. If by the realization of the eternal self, one may not come to the delusory sorrow of the thought that the self is dead, yet quite common among people, as we see, is the painful delusion that the self is subject to heat and cold, pleasure and pain, as also to the grief due to the loss of pleasure of it or due to the arrival of pain. So what happens is, some people, despite knowing that the self is eternal, despite knowing that the self is changeless, still some people identify with that jiva and feel that things like heat and cold, joy and sorrow come to them. So what happens here is shita. Shita means coolness. Ushna means heat. So cold and heat, sukha and dukkha, joy and sorrow, they feel that all of this comes to them. How? Matra sparshastu kaunteya. Through the contacts of senses with objects, all of this will come. And Lord Krishna says, when you feel like that, when you feel like you're in joy and sorrow, when you feel like you've become the experiencer, when all of these things are happening to you, he says, Agama apayino anityaha. Know that all of these things that are coming to you are with beginning and with end. And therefore, he says, Tan stitikshasva bharata. Therefore, Arjuna, endure it. Endure the contacts of the senses with the objects. Endure that joy and sorrow. Endure that cold and heat. Endure it, because it will come and it will go. This word titiksha requires deeper explanation. So we will take that up at length next week. Okay? For today, I will just recap what we did. Then we will say the closing prayer. And then there are some questions here. So then I will answer those questions after. Today, we went to verse 2.11. In this 2.11, what Lord Krishna is trying to do is he's telling Arjuna the knowledge of the self. Why is he telling Arjuna the knowledge of the self? Arjuna's sad. Arjuna did not ask for knowledge of the self. He's just sad. And he just said, Yat shreyasya nishchitam bruhi tanme. Tell me what's good for me. Just tell me what's good for me. He's sad. But the root cause of his sorrow is ignorance. Because he is sad because of his delusion. Because of, I belong to them, they belong to me. Why does he feel that way? Because he feels I am the body, the mind, the intellect. Why does he feel that way? Because he's ignorant of who he really is. And therefore, Lord Krishna knows the root cause is ignorance. So Lord Krishna tells him here that Na anushochanti panditaha. The wise never grieve. Who are the wise? The wise who have the knowledge of the self, they will never grieve. Because they know who they truly are. They know they are that self, which is changeless. What else about this self? We saw that in verse number 12, that this self is eternal. There's never a time where the self was not, and there will never be a time where the self will not be. The self is eternal. It's always there. And what else? He says, and the self is changeless. It's that changeless awareness in which all of the changes take place. Knowing this is who you are, therefore, Arjuna, do not grieve. Do not pave way to grieve. And then we also saw that while this knowledge is so precious, and while this knowledge was the teaching of Bhagavan Krishna to Arjuna, this may be the teaching for us, but it might not be something that is needed for others. They may require something else, such as acceptance. They may require strength. They may require their own period of healing. So while this is kept closely to our hearts, we have to see what other people's hearts need also. Okay? So with this, we will say the closing prayer, and then I will answer the questions here. Okay? Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.